I won't share my name, not yet, maybe not ever, but what I'm about to unveil will fundamentally disrupt your understanding of the world we inhabit and the era we're stumbling through. For months, I've been locked in an internal struggle, wrestling with the decision to bring this story into the open, fully aware of the skepticism, the raised eyebrows, and the outright scorn that often greets revelations like mine. The thought of being dismissed as a crackpot or a casualty of my own imagination has kept me silent, my lips sealed against the tide of what I've carried inside. But the weight of this truth has grown too heavy, too urgent. I can't hold it back any longer. So with that said, I am remaining anonymous, choosing to keep my name unspoken, my face unseen, for reasons that feel right to my soul. I am grateful for Anthony reaching out to me here at Conscious Chronicles, offering a space where I could finally unburden this story. It's not about me, it's about what's coming, what's already here, and the choice we all face. Time is short, but there's still time to prepare if we act now. What happened to me wasn't just another near-death experience, the kind you might skim in a tabloid or overhear in a hushed conversation. It was something far greater, a meticulously planned encounter, a divine appointment where the fragile membrane between our physical existence and the boundless eternal was peeled back with purpose. The Lord Himself showed me events that aren't on the horizon. They're already breaking through, threading into the fabric of our daily lives. Signs of a final battle I can't keep to myself any longer. People deserve to know. They need to prepare their hearts, their minds, their very souls for what's approaching. Before I dive into the heart of what I saw beyond this life, you need to understand who I was before that night, a baseline, a snapshot of the ordinary woman I'd been, so you can measure the earthquake that shook me to my core. I didn't carry any weight beyond the small orbit of my life in suburban Minnesota. I was what most would label a standard Christian. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that would make you pause and take notice. I attended church most Sundays, sitting in the same familiar pew, nodding along to sermons I only half absorbed. I'd murmur grace before meals, a quick habit more than a heartfelt ritual. And every so often, I'd volunteer in the community, serving meals at a local shelter, organizing a coat drive. Small acts that felt good, but never demanded much of me. By profession, I was a nurse at Memorial General Hospital, a job that kept me tethered to the chaos and fragility of human life. I had a tight circle of friends, women I'd known since nursing school or met through church, the kind you could count on for a laugh or a shoulder to lean on. My days unfolded in a quiet, predictable rhythm in a modest house on a street lined with maple trees and snowdrifts, a life that blended seamlessly into the backdrop of Middle America. My faith was there, steady as a heartbeat. But if I'm stripping this down to the truth, it was more superficial than I'd ever admitted to myself. It was a cozy faith, safe and unchallenging, a Sunday accessory I slipped on and off without much thought. Looking back now, with eyes sharpened by what came after, I can see how God was quietly, persistently, preparing me for something monumental, even when I was too distracted or complacent to notice. In the months leading up to that January night, an odd restlessness began to stir in my spirit, a faint nagging pull I couldn't name or shake. My prayers, once brief and mechanical, grew heavier, more fervent, spilling out of me with an intensity that surprised me. I'd wake in the small hours, the world still cloaked in darkness, gripped by an overwhelming urge to pray, though I had no clue what I was pleading for or who I was lifting. At work, during those endless shifts in the ER, I started to see things, subtle shifts that prickled my instincts. Patients' attitudes hardened. There was a rising edge of hostility toward anything remotely tied to faith, like snide comments, dismissive glares that I'd never noticed before. Death was no stranger to me. I'd seen it up close too many times to count. I'd held the hands of the dying, their fingers frail or trembling, whispered comfort to families drowning in grief. But nothing, not a single moment in my years as a nurse, could have braced me for what I was about to endure myself. It was a Thursday night in January, the air so frigid it bit at your skin, turning every breath into a fleeting cloud against the black sky. The timestamp on my last chart entry read 11:47 p.m. A trivial detail, you'd think, but it seared into my memory like a scar, a fixed point that divides my life into before and after. I'd just clocked out from a brutal 12-hour shift in the emergency department, one of those nights that left me hollowed out, every ounce of my professional calm stretched to its breaking point. We'd lost 2 patients that evening, and their deaths lingered with me like unwelcome ghosts. The first was a teenage girl, barely 16, her life extinguished by a drug overdose. Her pale face, still and lifeless on the stretcher, her hand limp as I stepped back and let the team call it. The second was an elderly man, his body worn thin by time, his heart finally giving up after a valiant, wheezing struggle. I stood by his bedside, watching the monitors flatline, feeling that familiar ache of helplessness settle into my chest. Their faces would later blur into the tapestry of what I saw that night, becoming threads in a revelation far bigger than I could have imagined. As I left the hospital, the parking lot stretched out before me, nearly deserted, save for a handful of cars belonging to the night shift crew. A thin fog had crept in, softening the edges of the world, transforming the streetlights into hazy, glowing spheres that seemed to hover in the stillness. It was the kind of fog that muffles everything, sound, movement, even your own thoughts, wrapping you in a strange, isolating quiet that makes the world feel smaller, more contained. My heels clicked against the concrete, a faint, lonely echo in the emptiness, my breath puffing out in little bursts as I trudged toward my car. My mind drifted to the ordinary. Did I have enough milk at home for tomorrow's coffee? Or would I need to stop at the gas station? Should I call my mother this weekend? See how she's holding up? What about that pile of laundry waiting in the corner of my bedroom? These were safe thoughts, mundane thoughts, the kind that anchor you to the routine of daily life, shielding you from the suspicion that everything you know is about to splinter apart. The first hint of danger didn't come as a sound, but as a feeling, that primal, gut-deep awareness that raises the hairs on your neck and quickens your pulse before your brain can catch up. Then I heard them. Footsteps, several sets, their rhythm sharp and deliberate. Nothing like the tired shuffle of hospital staff dragging themselves to their cars after a long shift. My heart lurched, a cold sweat prickling my palms. But before I could fully process the threat, before I could dig through my coat pocket for the pepper spray I always carried, or fish my phone from the depths of my purse, something solid and unforgiving slammed into the back of my head. It wasn't the clean blackout you see in movies. Time didn't fade to nothing. It fractured into jagged, crystalline shards of hyper-awareness. I felt the icy pavement crash against my cheek as I crumpled, the rough texture scraping my skin. I tasted the metallic bite of blood flooding my mouth, sharp and coppery. I heard furious voices barking demands. My purse, my phone, everything I had, their words slicing through the fog like blades. The irony hit me even then, a bitter twist in my dazed mind. I'd spent my night fighting to save lives, pouring myself into every stitch and bandage, and now my own life dangled by a thread, mere steps from the hospital's glass doors. I tried to comply. Take it all. None of it mattered enough to die for. But there was something in their voices that chilled me deeper than the January air. It wasn't just greed or desperation. It was a rage, a venomous fury that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Now, with the clarity of hindsight, I recognize it as the same darkness I'd glimpsed in fleeting moments at work. Those shadowed eyes, those hardened hearts, distilled here into its rawest, most brutal form. Then the blows came. Steel-toed boots crashing into my ribs, my spine, and my skull. Each strike sent shockwaves of agony through me, a pain I'd seen etched on the faces of countless assault victims, but never felt myself. It was a fire consuming me, an all-encompassing torment that drowned out everything else, until, abruptly, it stopped. The shift from searing pain to absolute nothingness wasn't like drifting into sleep or losing consciousness. It was instantaneous, profound, as if someone had flipped a switch on reality itself, rewriting the script of existence in a single, jarring breath. The doctors later told me what happened next defied every medical textbook they'd ever cracked open. By their records, I was clinically dead for exactly 10 minutes and 25 seconds. My heart silent, my brain flatlined, no detectable signs of life. My colleagues, my friends on the trauma team, worked over me with desperate precision. Their voices a distant hum I couldn't hear, their hands pressing and pounding to drag me back. For those 10 minutes and 25 seconds, I was gone, according to every scientific measure. My pulse absent, and my pupils fixed. I was observing my old body abandoned on a stretcher, but where I went, where he took me, time shed its earthly shackles. What felt like an eternity stretched and folded into a single boundless moment, as if I'd stepped beyond the relentless march of seconds into a realm where past, present, and future converged in a symphony of eternal now. In the months since that night, I've groped for words to capture what I experienced. But language feels like a flimsy tool, a child's toy trying to grasp the infinite. How do you describe colors that have no earthly name, hues that shimmer beyond the spectrum we know? How do you convey sensations that defy every sensory anchor we've ever clung to? Touch, sound, sight, all merging into something wholly other. The first thing that struck me was the light, but calling it light feels laughably inadequate, like calling the ocean water or the sky blue. It was more than illumination. It was alive, warm, sentient, embracing, a radiant presence that flowed from every direction yet had no discernible source. It didn't just brighten the space around me, it revealed, peeling back layers of existence I'd never dreamed existed. In that light, I felt weightless, unshackled from the throbbing pain and fragile limits of my broken body. More than that, I felt awake, truly, fully awake, for what seemed the first time in my 30-odd years. It was as if I'd spent my entire life squinting through a fogged-up window, my view of reality smudged and distorted. And now, at last, someone had wiped it clean. Everything sharpened into focus, crisp, vivid, more real than the reality we cling to in our flesh and blood world, a clarity that made my previous life feel like a shadow play on a dimly lit stage. What came next wasn't just a fleeting glimpse of the afterlife or a hazy near-death vision to scribble in a journal. It rewrote my understanding of life, death, time itself, and the invisible war raging around us, whether we feel its tremors or bury our heads in the sand. But before I unravel those details, you need to grasp something critical. This wasn't a random peek behind the cosmic curtain, or a trauma-induced hallucination cooked up by a battered brain. It was a divine encounter, a carefully orchestrated moment designed to warn and equip those with ears to hear and eyes to see. I wasn't anyone special, not a saint with a halo, not a scholar poring over ancient texts, not a missionary with a trail of miracles in my wake. I was a regular Christian, living a regular life, church on Sundays, a steady job, a mortgage, a coffee habit, and I believe that's exactly why I was chosen. If God could unveil these truths to someone as unremarkable as me, a nurse from Minnesota with no grand spiritual pedigree, then his message isn't reserved for the pious elite or the theological giants. It's for everyone, every ordinary soul willing to listen, every heart open to the call. In the weeks creeping up to that January night, there were signs, soft, subtle whispers of something brewing beneath the surface. My prayer life took on a new edge, a pressing urgency I couldn't explain or shake loose. I'd find myself on my knees in the quiet of my living room, words tumbling out with a fervor I didn't recognize, as if some unseen force was pulling them from me. At the hospital, during those long shifts that blurred into one another, I began to sense a thickening darkness, not just in the patients who cycled through my care, their bodies broken or failing, but in the air itself, in the systems and structures that held our world together. People grew sharper, angrier, families seemed more fractured, more lost, and a heavy hopelessness settled in, a weight no medicine or kind word could lift. Looking back, even the attack fits into that bigger picture, a single brushstroke in a vast, unfolding canvas. Those men who ambushed me weren't just desperate criminals acting on a whim. They were conduits of a growing shadow, a malice that's swelling in our world and preparing to step fully into the light. Their fury wasn't aimless or petty. It was a symptom of something immense, something sinister, unfurling across the globe like a storm gathering strength. The medical team who dragged me back from the brink still talk about that night in hushed, bewildered tones, their voices tinged with a mix of awe and unease. They toss around words like miracle and unexplainable, though most shy away from pinning it on anything divine, preferring the safety of clinical ambiguity. My injuries should have been a death sentence, cracked ribs splintering into my lungs, a fractured skull leaking life onto the pavement, oxygen starvation that should have turned my brain to mush. Yet I woke up whole, no trace of lasting damage, no medical reason for my lungs to draw breath again, or my heart to resume its steady beat. that healing, jaw-dropping as it was to everyone who saw my chart, is a footnote compared to what I saw in those 10 minutes and 25 seconds. It flipped my world inside out, my priorities, my fears, my grasp of what's happening in the here and now and what's barreling toward us with relentless certainty. The veil between our physical plane and the spiritual realm is gossamer thin, far more fragile than we dare imagine, a breath away from tearing wide open. What I experienced wasn't a quick trip to heaven or a textbook near-death story to recount over coffee. It was a guided journey through the currents of today and the storms of tomorrow, led by the one who holds every second, every heartbeat, every soul in his hands. What I saw in those minutes haunts me and fuels me in equal measure, a dual-edged fire that both terrifies and compels me to speak, no matter the cost to my reputation, my comfort, my quiet little life. As my body lay cooling on that frostbitten concrete, my spirit soared into a revelation of the battle we're all entangled in. Whether we feel its tremors beneath our feet or bury our heads in the sand of routine. It showed me the spiritual roots twisting beneath our headlines, the unseen forces pulling levers behind the scenes, and the eternal stakes of the choices we're making in this fragile, fleeting moment of history. This isn't just another tale of survival to shrug off or file. It's an alarm, a rallying cry, a desperate plea to prepare. Some will roll their eyes, dismiss it as a delusion born of pain or oxygen deprivation, a nurse's mind playing tricks under duress. Others will feel a tug, a resonance with the unease I'd carried in the months before that night, a stirring in their own spirits they can't quite name. But I must tell it, no matter how it's received, no matter who turns away or leans in. Time is slipping through our fingers, and God's people must ready themselves for what lies ahead. Then I heard his voice, simple, profound. He said my name, just my name, spoken with a love so deep it unraveled me, an authority so vast it commanded every fiber of my being to respond. It was a voice that held the raw power of creation itself, the same voice that spoke stars into being, that parted seas, that breathed life into dust. Yet it carried the tender intimacy of a father calling his child home. I turned, though I'm not sure I had a body in the conventional sense, not in that place, beyond places. And there he was, Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, standing before me in a glory that defies every human attempt to pin it down. His presence was overwhelming, uncontainable, yet it didn't crush me. He drew me in. His eyes. Oh, his eyes. They held all the love in the universe, a boundless compassion that saw me to my core. But there was something else there too, a fierce determination I'd never seen in any painting or stained glass window. They were like flames of fire, blazing with holy purpose, yet they didn't burn me. They purified, stripping away pretense and leaving only truth. Looking into those eyes, I saw myself as I truly was. Every flaw laid bare, every failure exposed, every moment of selfishness or cowardice illuminated. Yet in the same instant, I felt utterly loved, completely accepted, a paradox only divine love could hold together without breaking. "My child," he said, his voice resonating through me like a chord struck on some cosmic instrument. "I have brought you here to witness what must soon take place. The time is short, and my people must be prepared." Before I could muster a response, before I could even process the weight of his words, we were moving, or perhaps reality itself was shifting around us. bending to his will. I saw the earth from above, but not as a satellite image or an astronaut's postcard view. I was seeing it layered, unveiled, both the physical sprawl of continents and cities and the spiritual currents pulsing beneath, dimensions normally hidden from human eyes now laid bare. What I saw broke my heart and lit a fire in my soul all at once. A great darkness was spreading across the globe, an oily, suffocating shadow seeping into every nation, every city, every corner of human endeavor. But it wasn't just darkness, it was deception, a web of lies so intricate, so cunningly woven, that it could ensnare even the sharpest minds if they weren't anchored in unshakable truth. I watched it slither through governments, twisting policies and power, through schools and universities, reshaping thought, through media, spinning narratives, even through churches diluting the gospel with half-truths. The scariest part was how subtle it started. Small concessions that seemed harmless, slight tweaks to scripture to soften its edges, truth blended with soothing falsehoods, sin reframed as tolerance or progress. Each compromise cracked the door wider, inviting the darkness in. "Watch carefully," Jesus said, his voice steady but urgent, "for this is already beginning." Then I saw something that sent a chill racing through my spirit. A figure rising from the shadows, a man who radiated wisdom and charisma, his presence magnetic, his words dripping with a compassion that felt almost too perfect. People flocked to him, drawn like moths to a flame, and I understood why. He spoke of unity, of peace, of prosperity, beautiful ideals that tugged at the heart. He offered solutions to humanity's deepest wounds: climate collapse, economic disparity, religious strife. His answers were polished, logical, even kind. And I saw Christians, good, faithful people, nodding along, finding ways to twist his teachings into alignment with their Bibles. This was the Antichrist, though he wore no horns, no sinister grin. His deception was masterful because it wasn't blatant evil. It was truth laced with lethal lies. He spoke of God, but not the God I knew, of spirituality, but not faith, of love, but a love unmoored from truth. "Many will be deceived," Jesus said, his tone heavy with sorrow, "even some who think they know me." The vision shifted, and I saw churches, thousands of them, packed with people, their pews full, their voices lifted in song. But something was horribly wrong. In so many of these places, the light of Christ's presence was faint, flickering, or gone entirely. People went through the motions, singing hymns, reciting prayers, raising hands in praise. But their hearts were distant, their worship hollow. They had a shell of godliness, just as Scripture warns, but no power, no depth. Their faith was a shallow pool, fed by emotion and tradition, not a living relationship with the one they claimed to serve. But then I saw something that sparked hope amid the gloom. Scattered across the globe were pinpoints of brilliant light, believers whose devotion to Christ ran deeper than Sunday rituals or cultural habits. They were being forged through hardship, refined like gold in a crucible. They weren't always the loudest voices or the most visible faces. Many were ordinary people living quiet lives, but their love for Jesus was extraordinary, unshakable. I witnessed the rise of the false prophet, a figure working in tandem with the Antichrist, performing signs and wonders that dazzled and deceived. Together, they rolled out a global system, economic, social, political, that promised to fix the world's chaos. But it came at a steep price: total allegiance. The technology behind it was breathtaking, weaving control into every transaction, every interaction, in ways that would have seemed like science fiction a decade ago. Those who resisted were slowly squeezed out, unable to buy, sell, or function without bowing to the system. Yet amid this, I saw something astonishing. God's people, the true believers, were sustained by miracles, provided for like Elijah by the brook, their needs met in ways the world couldn't fathom. Small communities of faith sprang up, sharing what little they had, lifting each other up, their peace defying the persecution closing in. Jesus showed me how this oppression would build, starting with whispers of ridicule, social exclusion, then hardening into legal barriers, economic chokeholds, and finally, physical violence. But what stunned me was how the true church grew stronger under the weight, not weaker. The shallow faith that had marked so much of modern Christianity burned away, leaving a core of pure, resolute trust in God. I saw believers faced with choices. Deny Christ, bend just a little to escape the pressure, or stand firm. Some faltered, thinking they could hide their faith behind public compromise, but that first step led them deeper into darkness until their light snuffed out. Others held fast, no matter the cost, and their light blazed brighter. He revealed how the enemy wielded technology as a weapon in this deception, systems that seem convenient or benevolent, morphing into tools of surveillance and control. Social media, digital currencies, artificial intelligence, all twisted against those who clung to truth. But God gave his people wisdom to navigate it, some staying within the system as witnesses, others stepping away entirely, guided by his voice. Then Jesus turned my eyes to the preparation needed for what's coming. I saw how vital it was for believers to root themselves in Scripture, not just skimming verses, but knowing it deep in their bones. Those who did could spot the lies, unmoved by the false prophet's wonders or the Antichrist's silver tongue. Prayer, too, was a force beyond what I'd imagined. I saw it holding back darkness, carving out space for the gospel to spread. The unified cries of God's people rising like a tidal wave against the enemy's plans. I watched spiritual warfare unfold in a way that redefined it for me. Not loud declarations or rituals, but quiet obedience, steadfast faith, hearts kept pure before God. The strongest weapons weren't flashy. They were unwavering trust, sacrificial love, absolute loyalty to truth. Jesus showed me a generation of young people rising up, their hearts ablaze with a hunger for the real, unwatered down gospel, willing to pay any price to follow him fully. Then came the armies, demonic spirits rallying the kings of the earth, deceived into thinking they could challenge God himself. They gathered at Armageddon, the valley of Megiddo, and what followed was both terrifying and glorious. Jesus appeared, not as the gentle figure I'd first seen, but as the warrior king of Revelation, eyes like fire, crowns on his head, a sword of truth from his mouth. The battle wasn't a clash of steel. His presence alone shattered every lie, toppling the Antichrist and false prophet into the lake of fire, their armies crumbling before his breath. He showed me markers, signs to watch for, a global economic shift, promising stability but chaining humanity, environmental crises exploited for control, a false peace in Israel leading to chaos, a technological leap turned into a leash, a religious merger branding Christ's exclusivity as extremism. But with the warnings came promises, supernatural provision, wisdom, networks of believers shielded by God, healings when medicine failed, a Holy Spirit surge in the darkest corners. Preparation was key, spiritually, through deep scripture and prayer, practically by simplifying life and building community, emotionally by forging resilience now. Then I saw the joy awaiting the faithful, a glory so vast it dwarfed every trial. Tell them to prepare, Jesus said, his words searing into me. Tell them to stay close to me. Time is short, but my grace is enough. Our conversation deepened. His answers to my questions about suffering and sovereignty reshaped my faith. He chose me, he said, because my ordinariness made his message accessible to all. Back in my body, I awoke transformed, physically healed, yes, but more. My priorities realigned, my relationship shifted, my nursing became a ministry. My life is simpler, urgent, purposeful, lived with peace amid the storm. All of this isn't just my story, it's a call. And as I stand here sharing this with you, I urge you to listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. The hour is late and the world is shifting beneath our feet, but there is hope, there is victory, and there is a call to rise. Prepare now, for the days ahead are uncertain, but the promise of Christ's return is certain. Stand firm, hold fast, and let his light in you burn brighter than ever. The battle is his, and victory belongs to those who trust in him. Thank you for listening.